talked about a couple climate related stories lately on, I think it was Monday's show, right? I think Monday's, or maybe last week. Was it last week? Oh my gosh, the time is flying. I don't know what's happening. So last week we talked about, the climate auctions that are happening. So the Climate Commitment Act passes in Washington state. January 2023, the auctions for carbon credits began. And as soon as they began, boy, the prices were through the roof, and as a result, gas prices went up like 40 cents a gallon. So something interesting is happening right now with the latest climate auction. The credits went for like nothing, half of what they were going for less than a year ago. And Todd Myers had tweeted out that he believes that's an indicator that the market, the people who have to buy these carbon credits, that they think voters are going to repeal the Climate Commitment Act in November. So basically, they got to pick up these credits, but they don't want to pay a lot for them in case those credits are worthless starting next year. So I wanted Todd to come on to talk about that. But while we had him, the Biden administration has announced some new rules, this is from the New York Times, aimed at expanding electric vehicles. The New York Times says the regulation would require automakers to sell more electric vehicles and hybrids by gradually tightening limits on tailpipe pollution. The question is, are the goals they're setting unrealistic given the fact that Americans really haven't shown a lot of interest in buying EVs? Here's Todd Myers with the Washington Policy Center. Todd Myers, welcome back to Undivided.
Always nice to join you.
Yeah, before we talk about what's going on with the carbon auctions in Washington, I wanted to bring up this Biden and EVs and kind of where the country is heading. So the EPA has finalized its rules for tailpipe emissions and trying to limit them. But it's interesting because at the same time, I almost feel like their ruling has like an acknowledgement that EVs aren't catching on as quick as they'd hoped.
Yeah, that's right. So they have to be very careful because there was a strong trend 2 years ago, even last year, of buying more electric vehicles. Hertz, famously, the rental car agency, put a lot of effort into EVs and then is now selling those EVs because people didn't even want to rent them, let alone buy them. So there's been kind of a step back from EVs. Well, of course, the EPA and here in Washington State, they don't want to acknowledge that. So they're pushing forward, although the EPA rule came out less strict than some people feared, but still pretty strict nonetheless.
So, I mean, I guess practically speaking, how is that working? If they've got this timeline to eliminate, tailpipe emissions or to reduce them, but at the same time, people aren't interested, it seems, in buying the alternative, I guess, where does that leave the country? What are they going to do if they get to that point where they're like, hey, we're supposed to be like, and then everybody's like, well, we don't want your electric cars.
Well, we've been through this before, both with other states and the EPA. The EPA had a mandate more than a decade ago for people to buy biofuels and different particular types of biofuels, like one that's called cellulosic ethanol, which was supposed to be the next great thing. Well, the problem with it is that it didn't work, right? It was very expensive. So the EPA just kept putting off the numbers and just kept postponing the targets. So, as much as they put these targets in and say you must meet these goals, and under the current goals by 2032, it's about 67% of new vehicles would need to be electric under the federal rules. So we've been through this before, and if they miss the targets, the EPA just says, well, sorry, we'll waive them for now because reality sets in.
Yeah, but if you've got like a certain percentage where it's got to be electric vehicles, this puts, I think, car manufacturers in a tough position because they want to make the cars that people want to buy. So I guess how do they navigate that if they've got these rules that they're under, but then people aren't buying their electric vehicles?
That's exactly right. And of course, the reason that they need to make these rules is because people won't buy them unless they're forced, right? I mean, that's the assumption behind the rules is that, right, you don't create a regulation to force people to buy or sell things that are popular. You only create those regulations when they're not. So that's what's going on here, and how that works out, we'll see. Washington already has these rules, and ours are actually more strict. Like I said, in 2032, the Biden administration rules is 67% of new vehicles. By 2032, Washington has to be 82%. And just 3 years from now, in 2026, we have to be at 35% of new vehicles are either partial hybrid, which is plug-in hybrid, or full electric. The last 2 months, we've been at 11%. So we need to triple in just 2 years.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. And Jay Inslee is no stranger to setting climate goals and then just skipping right past them like it never
Yeah.
ever happened.
Yeah.
What do you think, Todd, it's going to take for more people to be interested in buying an electric vehicle?
Well, a variety of things. One is the price has to come down. The average sale price of an electric vehicle in 2023 in Washington state was $57,000. So you're talking a very nice Mercedes Benz. Well, okay, people can't afford that. If you need to get to 35% or 82%, right, prices have to come down. Government can't do that. That's on the manufacturers. They need to find ways to do that. Like I said, we've been through this before. In the 1990s, California had a mandate requiring that a certain percentage of vehicles be electric, and they just waived those rules completely because the technology wasn't there. So I think that's the fundamental thing. The other thing is the range has to increase. Even people say, well, but you can get a Nissan Leaf. That's not very expensive. That's true, but the range of a Nissan Leaf is very short. It's essentially a commuter car. I actually one time was doorbelling for a political candidate, and a guy had a Nissan Leaf and a Toyota Prius. And I said, it's interesting that you have both of those. Why do you have both of those? And he said, oh, well, because if I have to go anywhere a long distance, I take the Prius instead of the Leaf. So he actually had two cars that were doing the job of one car
Yeah.
because he wanted an electric vehicle.
Wow, that's not feasible for a lot of families. So let's talk about the carbon auctions. We discussed earlier on the week, based on your reporting, the fact that in the latest carbon auction, the credits went for less. And you see that as an indicator that the market is sort of betting on or thinking that voters might repeal the Climate Commitment Act in November. Explain.
Yeah, so it's a little bit complicated. The way the system works is that for every metric ton of CO2, an industry or other organization that's covered, University of Washington has to buy carbon credits because they emit CO2. So they have to buy them at an auction. And so the price at that auction goes up and down based on supply and demand. But you don't turn those credits in. The credits that they're buying now aren't turned in until 2025. So if the CCA is repealed by Initiative 2117, then those credits are worth zero because you don't have to turn them in anymore. So let's say you're sitting here and you know that you have an obligation because the law covers you, but you're not sure whether that is going to be around next year. What do? You bid as low as you possibly can, and that's what we saw. The minimum price is $24. The final bid price was $25.72, I think it is, which is less than half of what it was in just December. So people clearly think that it might go away. They don't want to be caught short if the CCA doesn't get repealed, but at the same time, they don't want to risk any more money than is necessary. And there are two results of this. The first is that the impact at the pump is going to go down.
Great.
So the impact at the pump has been in the mid 30 cents per gallon. The total cost has been about 43 cents per gallon. Some of that is picked up by the refiners. Some of that is picked up by the gas stations themselves. But about 35 cents a gallon is passed on to the consumers. Well, you're going to see that go down. We've already started to see the gap between Washington and Oregon go down. And I think you're going to see that more over the next week. So that's good news. The second is that if the prices had just stayed what they were in December, Washington residents would be paying $137 million more dollars in taxes than they would have otherwise. So I think that's what's really interesting is that just having the initiative on the ballot has already saved taxpayers $137 million.
Oh, I love that. Although it scares me a little bit because I don't want this sort of false reduction in the impact of the Climate Commitment Act right before the election. You know, like I want voters, I hate to say it, but I want them to remember the full impact of the CCA at the gas pump, so they remember how much is at stake, you know, financially for every family. So it's a sort of push and pull, like I'm glad we're saving money right now, but I don't want it to reduce the likelihood that the CCA is repealed.
Well, and that's exactly what the CCA supporters, and actually the guy who wrote the CCA, Reuben Carlyle, is like, oh, no, this is more what we expected. This is the actual cost. It's not that much. Well, still, 20 cents a gallon is not a small amount in the first place. But second, it's nonsense, and he knows it because demand for the credits fell by 40% just compared to the third quarter last year. That shows that a lot of people who would have otherwise bid and who were bidding last year are now like, I'm going to stay out of the market if I can. So yeah, they're playing that game of pretending that this is what normal is when clearly it's not.
Yeah, no, and that's why you got the saying, right, for the initiatives. Vote yes, pay less.
Yeah.
Vote yes, pay less. We're just trying to drill that into people's brains so when they get their ballot in November, they're like, oh, I'm supposed to vote yes to pay less. So, all right, Todd Myers, thank you as always for helping us make sense of complex issues. We appreciate you.
Nice to talk with you.
Todd's the best. And yeah, that kind of worries me. It's like, oh, how convenient. Now gas prices are going to go down as a result of these market factors, thinking, hey, this thing's going to be repealed. And then people will be lulled into a false sense of confidence. Don't fall for it. Vote yes, pay less.